"Get out of here, you worthless idiot!" The shout cut through the air like a knife, slicing across the 3,000-square-foot kitchen and silencing every sound. Everything froze. The sizzle of oil in cast iron pans, the rhythmic chopping on wooden boards, the ringing of the service bell gone. Like a symphony cut off mid-climax. The man with salt and pepper hair stood in front of the sink hands, still dripping with cold water, gripping the coarse fabric of his apron. His eyes looked up not with fear, not with defiance, but with a quiet gaze, thick as the winter fog that rolls down Fifth Avenue. That was Michael Carter, 48 years old, the founder of the famed Silver Oak restaurant chain, known across America. But here right now, he was just Mike, the new dishwasher. Unknown, unacknowledged, surrounded only by dirty water-burnt grease, and the broken remnants of pride once polished by fame. Ethan Grayson, the new manager, tall, young, his gelled hair slicked back like a magazine model, stood his ground, finger pointed squarely at Michael, voice unyielding. "Ruin my scallops again, and you're out for good. Got that, Mike?" A few people in the kitchen glanced over, then quickly dropped their eyes as if afraid the storm might turn on them next. The burnt scent of truffle oil lingered in the air, mixed with the stench of fear from those who had learned to survive under command. Michael said nothing. He unclipped his apron, folded it slowly, and set it aside. The fingers that had once held his first chef's knife at 15 trembled not from fear, but from pain. The pain of being cast out of the very place he had built, with sleepless nights, with dreams cooked into every dish, with a heart laid bare on every plate. Silver Oak Manhattan, the symbol of culinary elegance, of artistry, of himself, was now a gilded cage seized by unfamiliar hands. No one in that kitchen knew that the man just humiliated before their eyes was the very creator of it all. The one Food and Fame had once called the Michelangelo of the stove. The man who once made the president wait an hour just to taste his roasted foie gras with wine-poached pears. Michael turned away, walking slowly toward the back exit, past the scorching pans, past the hushed whispers of fear, past a world he once called home. Each step was a scream swallowed down, each footfall a burial for another piece of his once thriving heart, now muted by polite applause and dimmed memories. The soft yellow of the kitchen lights cast his shadow long across the black tile floor. The darkness in the kitchen wasn't from a lack of light, but from the way people treated one another. He paused at the steel door, fingers resting on the icy handle. 1 second, 2 seconds. He glanced back at the kitchen one last time, the place that was once his dream, now just a hollow shell. Michael exhaled slow and steady. Maybe it's time they remembered who built all of this. Michael stood in the rain, exiting Silver Oak through the back door. The kitchen light cast a dim glow across his back like a ghost from a lost past. The cold New York wind slapped his face, but it wasn't nearly as bitter as the sting in his chest. The sting of betrayal inside the very place he had built with his own hands. How did it all come to this? How had a restaurant once hailed as the pride of Manhattan become a place where he was looked at as a burden? The story began a week earlier. Michael's office sat on the 58th floor of a glass tower overlooking Central Park. From here, New York City stretched out in a dazzling sunset like a cruel reminder that even the brightest lights can burn themselves out. On his laptop screen was the financial report for the Manhattan branch. Revenue down 27%, high employee turnover, negative customer feedback up 38%. The name Ethan Grayson appeared repeatedly in the audit notes, incorrect orders, missing ingredients, unapproved menu changes, and reports of rude behavior towards staff. Michael set down his glass of Cabernet, a heaviness settling in his chest. Behind him hung a black and white photo, Silver Oak's grand opening in 2003. In it, he stood in his early 30s, wearing a white chef's coat, arms draped around his first two partners, men who had stood beside him in the blistering heat of a tiny kitchen behind an old sandwich shop in Brooklyn. They had slept on storage room floors, shared trays of experimental dishes. He still remembered the days they couldn't afford A5 Wagyu and had to use the cheapest cuts yet, still turned them into dishes that moved diners to tears. He once cooked for 40 hours straight to prepare for a film producer's first party, washed every plate, polished every glass, and memorized every loyal customer's face. Back then, every compliment was fuel not for fame, but for a belief that food was the last honest language left in this world. And now, that place had become a cold machine, a luxury dish assembly line run by someone who knew nothing of love, only profit. A new email popped up, the latest inventory invoice, truffle oil, not stocked, but signed as received. Third time this quarter. Michael closed his eyes, not in anger, but with the quiet grief of a builder watching the foundation of his life chipped away piece by piece. I'm the one who let it drift off. Course, he thought to himself. I thought I could step back and trust, but dreams don't survive on their own. He stood and walked to the steel cabinet in the corner. Inside was an old wooden box. Inside the box were a faded baseball cap, a pair of rubber gloves, a pale gray hoodie. It was the uniform he wore on his very first kitchen job, not as an executive chef, but as a dishwasher in a run-down Italian joint. Michael looked at himself in the mirror. The gleam of prestige was gone from his eyes. The weariness of power, too. All that remained was quiet and a familiar resolve. If he had once climbed from the bottom, he could start again, from there. He put on the cap, pulled the hood over his head, and left the office. The city lights still sparkled just as they always did. But for him, a darker chapter had just begun, and he chose to walk straight into it. No one noticed a middle-aged man with a freshly shaved face, worn-out kappa mask, and slightly stooped shoulders, just another guy looking for a side job. Silver Oak had over 60 employees, people constantly coming and going, especially in the auxiliary kitchen. Who had time to remember the face of a silent dishwasher who always wore gloves and never looked up? Michael didn't need a grand disguise. He only needed to do what the entire system had forgotten how to do: listen in silence. Monday morning, New York was unusually gray. There was no sunlight, only the dim glow of streetlights reflected on the rain-slick sidewalks. Michael stood outside Silver Oak, wearing a faded baseball cap, an old hoodie, and his hands tucked into his pockets. He looked no different from a tired delivery man or a middle-aged guy hustling for odd jobs. No one would have guessed that this quiet man was once a keynote speaker at the Culinary Legend Awards. The restaurant's facade remained as grand as ever. Gleaming glass walls, crystal chandeliers casting a gentle golden glow, and a raised silver sign, Silver Oak, since 2003. But as Michael looked deeper inside, he saw only one thing: that glow was no longer warm. It was cold, like the sterile light above a dying dream. The door opened. A new receptionist, who didn't recognize him, gave a curt instruction. Dishwasher interview, head straight down to the kitchen, speak to the manager. No raised voice, no questions, no introductions. Michael nodded silently, walking past the hallway that once bore his name. As he stepped into the kitchen, a familiar wave hit him, the smell of roasted meat, burnt garlic steam, rising from a simmering pot. But hidden beneath was another scent, the smell of depletion. Ethan was there, neat polish smiling, with his mouth, but not his eyes. He looked at Michael for exactly 3 seconds. "You're Mike dishwasher." Michael nodded. "No talking. Just wash. We don't have time for lazy old men here." No ID check, no resume, not a single word about kitchen culture. Just the kind of stripped-down efficiency found in industrial kitchens. Michael began. The sink was too tall now compared to his younger days. His back ached faster, and the icy water numbed his hands. But he didn't care. This wasn't the first time he'd touched burned grease. And he knew, to see where the roots have rotted, you have to look from the base. So he washed. And he watched. Lucas, the new kitchen assistant, always kept his head down, spoke softly, and his hands were trembling as he carried trays. One time he dropped a plate, and the head chef screamed directly into his face. No one spoke up. Sarah, once the beating heart of Silver Oak, now moved in silence, like a statue. Her eyes had dulled like lights seen through steam. No one in the kitchen spoke unless absolutely necessary. Everything functioned smoothly, like a cold machine. No soul, no laughter, no spirit. And Michael saw it, not just with his eyes, but with the heart that used to flutter every time he heard the crackle of a pan over flame. 7 days, 7 nights. No one recognized him. Not Ethan, not Sarah, not Lucas. They only saw a dishwasher, quiet, diligent, invisible. But every night when the kitchen lights dimmed, he would stand alone in the shadows, wiping down the cutting boards, realigning the knives, and picking up the broken fragments of a family he once called home. Rot doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with bowed heads. Tuesday at noon. The Silver Oak kitchen moved like a programmed battlefield, knives against boards, pots clanging, the head chef shouting orders. Everyone had a job. No one said a word more than needed. The entire space felt thick, as if every trace of laughter had been boiled out long ago. Michael stood at the sink-gloved hands, submerged in steaming water. But his eyes never left the young kitchen helper in the far corner, Lucas, who was struggling to open a shipment box. The label read, "Imported dried porcini mushrooms," but inside were just plain white mushrooms carelessly bagged. The boy stumbled toward the prep station, trying to shove the bag into the trash unnoticed. But Michael saw, and he wasn't the only one. Ethan, from the small office beside the kitchen, swung open the door, eyes sharp as blades. "Lucas, over here." Lucas inched forward, hands clenched, as if hoping to disappear into the walls. "Where are the ingredients?" Ethan asked. I did the inventory. They weren't in stock." Smack. Ethan's hand slammed onto the stainless steel table. "When something's missing, it's your fault. There's no excuse good enough to cover incompetence." No one spoke, not even Sarah, the woman who once scolded Michael for uneven carrot cuts, the one who taught him how to cook. Back in 2004, now just stood there, eyes lowered to the floor. Ethan turned away, leaving Lucas alone in the whirlwind of a kitchen that moved on as if he'd never been there. After the shift, as the kitchen lights dimmed, Michael quietly slipped a small envelope into Lucas's locker. Inside were a few folded bills, some medicine, and a pharmacy receipt with 3 items marked in red: insulin, antacid, heart supplements. No name, no note, just a silent act. From someone who had overheard a promise whispered the night before. "I'll figure it out, Mom. I promise." Michael didn't need to know more. That evening, he stayed behind after everyone had left. Sarah was quietly gathering cutting boards, her hands trembling like old leaves. She placed a knife in the wrong spot, something Sarah had never done. She used to be obsessed with precision. Michael waited until she was gone. He resharpened the blade, wiped the board clean, and realigned the spice jars, each small detail like stitching together a torn past. Not for anyone to see, but so he himself could still believe silver oak was salvageable. In a hidden corner behind the kitchen, he spotted a crumpled receipt left on the floor. He unrolled it and immediately saw the item listed white truffle oil, imported from Italy, signed Ethan Grayson. But Michael knew no such oil had ever reached the chefs. A faint red imprint bled through from the back of the page, like blood seeping from a deep cut. The pieces were starting to fall into place. No one saw anything, but Michael did. No one said a word, but inside him, a bell had begun to ring. There are wounds that don't bleed, but you can hear them cracking inside your heart. Wednesday night. Silver Oak was unusually quiet. The kitchen wasn't bustling. It was hushed, filled only with the hum of the exhaust fan and the dull, yellow glow of lights that felt like the kitchen's final breath. Michael crouched by the sink, soaked gloves, still scrubbing pots, but his eyes drifted to the far end of the kitchen, where Sarah was stacking knife trays. She looked older than he remembered. Her silver hair was loosely tied with an old elastic band, and the hand that once taught him how to hear meat doneness through the knife's vibration now trembled gently as she placed the santoku blade back on the rack. This was the same woman who once yelled at the head chef in front of the whole brigade for overheating a sauce. Now she moved like a forgotten menu page, swept under the table by the wind. Michael waited until she left. When the kitchen was empty, he stepped forward. The knives were slightly rusted at the hilt, the cutting board still greasy, the chicken chopping station reeking with a sour stench. He sharpened the blades, cleaned the boards, and rubbed the counters with an old lemon wedge, not to meet hygiene standards, but as if preserving the last shred of dignity in a space that once felt sacred. She once told him, "A great kitchen doesn't need to be fancy. As long as it feels warm when you stand in it, that's enough." Now it was cold, cold to the bone. As he was aligning the spice jars, Lucas walked in, shoulders hunched, clutching a torn coat, ready to go home. He paused when he saw Michael lining up the salt canisters. Lucas hesitated. "Sir, today, thank you, for the medicine." Michael didn't turn around. He just said, "There are people who make dishes, and people who nourish a kitchen. You should be the second kind." Lucas bit his lip, nodded, and hurried out. His worn shoes creaked against the tiles. Michael stayed alone. His hand reached into his chest pocket, still holding a quarter-folded old photo. Back then, it was Sarah, Michael, and their first two staff members standing in front of Silver Oak when the sign was still handwritten, when the kitchen had only 3 lights and 1 cast-iron pot. A strange footstep pulled him back from memory. It was Riley, the brown-haired waitress, always quiet, always the last to leave, always wiping down the final table no one noticed. She placed a trash bag on the counter, then turned to go. But Michael noticed her pause as she passed the spice rack. She inhaled deeply and smiled just a little. It lasted only a second, but Michael knew the soul of this kitchen wasn't gone. It was just buried. He turned off the lights, stood in the dark. His heart felt heavy, not from the decay, but from the quiet strength of those who had stayed, endured, and never once had their names spoken aloud. And it was they, these silent ones, who would become the fire that saved Silver Oak. When a traitor believes he's untouchable, that's when his footprints begin to show. Friday. Rain poured down as if someone had tipped a bucket over the entire city. Manhattan was drenched. Streetlights cast pale orange reflections onto puddled sidewalks. Silver Oak stayed open late for a private event. Armani suits, jet black evening gowns, and martini glasses at various stages of emptiness. Michael stood at the sink, washing each crystal glass as if it were a living thing. He wasn't waiting for guests. He was waiting for Ethan. Near midnight, the kitchen was nearly cleaned up, and staff were trickling out. Michael didn't leave. He quietly changed into his coat, pulled up his hood, and slipped around to the delivery entrance in the back, the spot where he'd sensed something off just days before. And tonight, the rain made everything clear. Ethan stood under the awning, smoking. A delivery truck rolled up, the driver stepping out and opening the back without a single document, just a sealed bag. Ethan took it secretive as a midnight deal in a crime film. Michael raised his phone and snapped 2 photos. No flash, no breath. Ethan stuffed the bag into the trunk of his car. Then, as if sensing something, he turned. His eyes scanned the darkness, but he saw nothing. Michael was already hidden behind a row of metal garbage bins. The next morning, the restaurant ran as usual. But Michael wasn't the same. He wasn't observing anymore. He was moving. During the midday rush, when the kitchen was operating at full throttle, Michael approached Ethan, still wearing rubber gloves, shirt damp from the dishwasher, and handed him the truffle oil receipt he had found earlier. "This, disappear somewhere." His voice was soft, like asking for a lighter, but his gaze was as sharp as a Japanese sashimi blade. Ethan looked at the paper, his brow furrowing. "You're a dishwasher. What do you know about inventory?" Michael didn't answer. He just stared. The kitchen air dropped half a beat. Riley froze. Lucas looked up. Even Sarah, still chopping onions, let her blade pause for the first time. Ethan scoffed, snatched the paper, crumpled it, and tossed it into the trash. "Stick to washing dishes. Next time you stick your nose where it doesn't belong, you're out." Michael bent down, picked up a knife, and wiped it clean. Not a word, not a single glance of defiance. Just silence. Then he stood and walked out of the kitchen. The hallway light was a murky yellow flickering. His hand clenched, then relaxed. He had endured enough. Sarah remained where she stood, having witnessed everything. As Michael passed her, she finally turned her eyes, no longer avoiding his. "It's time to end this, Michael." Michael froze, turned to face her. No words, no need for them. Their eyes met not as co-workers, but as witnesses to a dying dream. And in that gaze, he knew she had known all along. She was just waiting for him to return with the strength to fight. Sarah didn't smile, but the softness in her aged eyes was the deepest kind of support. Michael gave a slight nod, said nothing. He turned and walked down the hallway. The metal door behind the kitchen slowly closed behind him, and this time he wasn't walking away. He was coming back. Saturday night. Manhattan wore its silver evening gown. Silver Oak hosted a VIP dinner, a delegation of elite London business figures, renowned food connoisseurs with media influence. Ethan had warned everyone. It must be flawless, but no one in the kitchen felt right. Sarah stood by the ingredient check counter. The truffle box was already opened, its color pale. She picked up a piece and sniffed it. Had a strange, acrid smell. "This isn't real truffle," she said loud enough for the kitchen to hear. "And the beef, it's not up to standard either." Ethan spun around. "Who do you think you are? I approved those ingredients. Just follow the instructions." Sarah didn't back down. She simply set the mushroom down. "I'd rather be fired than deceive a guest." Ethan clenched his jaw, his knuckles white from tension. He glanced at Riley, his voice cold, as steel finished the dish. "Get it out. Now." Riley hesitated, pan in hand. His eyes lost focus for a moment before he gave a reluctant nod and stepped toward the stove, each footfall heavier with guilt. Sarah turned away, saying nothing more. but every blink she took was loaded as if she were watching a culinary soul walk into the furnace of industrial compromise. A server carried the plate into the dining hall. The soft melody of a piano played in the background. A woman in a red evening gown, pearls around her neck, took a sip of Bordeaux, setting the glass down, just as the Wagyu dish landed before her. And at that moment, the front door burst open. A gust of cold air swept in. The man who stepped through the door needed no introduction. Every Silver Oak staff member fell silent. Michael Carter, white shirt, grey suit, face calm like tempered steel. Two people followed him, an executive assistant holding a folder and a man wearing a Carter Enterprises security badge. Ethan flinched. He took a step back. What are you doing here?" Michael didn't answer. He surveyed the room, once then walked straight to the guest's table. He stopped before the lady in red, gave a slight bow. "Forgive the interruption, but I cannot let you dine on ingredients unworthy of your palate. I am the founder of Silver Oak, and I owe you an apology." The lady looked up, her gaze sharp but not angry. She simply set down her knife. Michael turned to Ethan. 3/4 of inventory fraud, unauthorized deliveries, fake truffles, diluted oils. I have photos, receipts, camera footage, staff testimonies, and a copy of your private contract with an outside supplier. Ethan turned pale. You were spying on me?" Michael didn't smile. "No, I just needed to wash dishes for a week to see what you turned this place into." Whispers rippled through the dining room. Riley stood frozen. Sarah stepped out from the kitchen, standing silently by the door, looking at Michael like someone who'd been waiting a very long time. Michael pulled out the suspension notice and handed it to his assistant. "Ethan Grayson, you are hereby suspended, effective immediately. Security, escort him off the premises. The documents have been sent to legal." The guards stepped forward. Ethan resisted flailing, but no one moved to help him. He was escorted out under the stunned gaze of the entire staff. The assistant whispered something to Michael. He nodded. A guard stepped out briefly, then returned with a specialized cold storage container, the kind reserved for transporting premium fresh ingredients. When the lid opened, the kitchen lights caught the ivory shimmer of wild truffles, the marbled fat of authentic Wagyu beef, and sealed bottles of mushroom oil certified by the Carter Enterprises lab. Riley was speechless. Sarah clutched her sleeve, eyes shimmering but dry. In that moment, Silver Oak's kitchen regained its honor. Michael turned to the kitchen staff, not with a scolding, not with blame. Then he turned back to the lady in red once more. "If you're still patient, I'd like to prepare this dish again personally, with real ingredients and real sincerity." She said nothing, but a faint smile touched her lips. She nodded, a small subtle nod that made the whole restaurant exhale. Michael took off his suit jacket and handed it to his assistant, rolled up his sleeves. No music, no spotlight, just a hot kitchen waiting and a promise he intended to keep. He turned and walked back toward the kitchen, where tomorrow would begin again, with the very first flame. No one left their seats yet. The entire restaurant held its breath. The VIP guest remained still, a powerful woman in a red gown, her gaze no longer scrutinizing, but silently following the man who had just shaken this elegant space to its core. Michael Carter needed no more words. He turned through the kitchen doors and stepped back into the soul of Silver Oak, the place he had once abandoned for far too long. Inside, no one moved. Riley lowered his knife like a man waking from a trance. Lucas shrank into a corner, wide-eyed, like a young apprentice, seeing justice take shape for the very first time. Sarah stood silently, her hand resting on the ingredient counter, but her eyes, for the first time in years, were clear, like someone witnessing something they had long stopped daring to believe. Michael removed his watch and washed his hands under warm water. A pristine white apron hung by the oven. He put it on, like slipping back into an old oath. As he tied the strings behind his back, the kitchen seemed to exhale for the first time in years. "I'll personally remake the dish," he said, not loudly, but each word hit the marble floor like stone, firm, complete. He looked at Sarah. "I need someone I trust. Help me with the mushrooms and the burry sauce." Sarah nodded. Her hands no longer trembled. No words were needed. One look said everything she had forgiven, and more importantly, she was ready to stand beside him again. Michael's knife danced across the board, gliding like a brushstroke. The mushrooms were sliced thin, precise as a Japanese woodcarver. The demi-glace warmed gently. No wasted movements, no hesitation. Everything was done by the hands of a man who once knew every inch of this kitchen the way he knew the folds of his own heart. Outside, no guests were left. No one flipped a table. No one called for a manager. The lady in red still sat not for the beef, but for the rarest thing of all, witnessing dignity being restored through action. 12 minutes later, Michael didn't let anyone else serve it. He carried the plate himself, a perfect wagyu, real truffle, gleaming demi-glace wild mushrooms releasing their deep aroma. It wasn't just food, it was honor plated in white porcelain. He bowed, voice low, but steady. "On behalf of Silver Oak and myself, I offer the sincerest apology for what you've endured. This is the dish you should have received from the beginning." The lady lifted her fork, took a bite. No one breathed. The restaurant froze in a single frame. And then she smiled. Not because of flavor, but because a promise had been kept. A single nod, subtle and quiet, silenced every doubt that had filled the room until now. Silver Oak wasn't just saved, it had been reborn in the fire of integrity by the very hands once dismissed and dirtied. If you believe honor can always be restored, and that honesty still touches the human heart, like, comment, and subscribe to Toch Story so you never miss stories that move the soul like this one.